Hey guys, it's that evil hag, together with Loremaster of Sotek again.
Hello.
As per request, we're back with more monsters inhabiting the old world and their real life origins. In this episode, we'll talk about what lurks in the ocean depths. And as you're probably guessing, it's not going to be Ariel, the freaking little mermaid. So, Sotek here dug up so many creeps, we might just have ruined your upcoming beach holidays. So let's go on to number five, the fish people. They are all yours.
All right. So, like in many fantasy universes, there is a civilization that lives deep beneath the depths in the Warhammer fantasy universe. However, they are not kind or human like, or quite frankly, interested in much other than just feeding. The only place where we know them to exist for certain is in the sunken lizardman city of Chupudal, which collapsed off of the continent of Lustria and sank to the bottom of the ocean. And in its golden spires now lives a horrifying race of aquatic bipedal creatures. The only other times we've seen them is that they show up in myths and legends among sailors, and that on stormy nights you might find your ship suddenly stuck as if it's hit a reef, but in reality, giant tentacles begin to come up the side of the ship, and clinging onto them are a horde of these horrific creatures that are very well noted to have large heads that open multiple directions to reveal their mouths, which are just lined with razor sharp teeth. And every ship that they've ever attacked has mysteriously disappeared. The only races that are aware of them to the extent that they know how to avoid and combat them are the Dark and High Elves, who sail the high seas and have actually fought them back before, and the Lizardmen, who have encountered them in some minor incidents relating to the coasts of Lustria. They are quite ferocious, and to make things even worse, they are intelligent. They're not idiots. They have technology, and they were able to develop unique weapons that allow them to get onto ships easier and tear apart sailors so that they can feed without issue. And of course, as one might expect, they wield many of the other creatures that we'll be talking about on this list. There's not, of course, a defined set of creatures that they're capable of controlling, but it's known that they have a fairly good relationship with many of the monsters of the deep.
Okay, clearly that demented Atlantis has multiple sources in both folklore and literature. People have been always afraid of the unknown, as H.P. Lovecraft keeps repeating, and the watery abyss was and still is as strange to us as the skies above. I'm getting a little poetic here. If you guys saw my video about the monsters from Polish Legends, you know how our embodiment of the fear of water looks. It's a weird, malicious, and hideous creature just waiting to shove people's heads underwater. As the ultimate life giving, but also very lethal, can you be more lethal and less lethal? Jesus, or lethal? I'm getting ultimately confused in here. Uh, yeah. Anyway, water is life giving and it also takes life away. So it has been worshipped in every single culture, starting from rainmaking rituals present on almost all continents, finishing on praying for the sea's benignancy to grant the sailors safe return. Everything that's sacred is usually also feared, and both holiness and gruesomeness demand some sort of depiction to make them a little less alien. And so we can name countless water related deities. Those more popular, like Poseidon, and those less popular, like I wanted to flash my knowledge here, but right. Anyway, not all of water related deities were nice. Just like the seas, they could be providing the people with food, but they could also take the husbands and fathers away. Uh, then again, we got solid portion of myths speaking of underwater civilizations. I mentioned Atlantis, but let's focus on good old H.P. Lovecraft, of course. Surely, even if you haven't read it, you saw a game or really any media influenced by that one excellent story called The Shadow over Innsmouth. And the longer I've been listening to Sotek here, the more convicted I am. Wait, I'm not convicted for anything. I'm convinced. What am I even talking
Yes,
about?
you're
um,
going to jail.
yeah, I'm just going to jail for liking Lovecraft too much. Uh, so really, pretty much everything he said points to the fact that the Warhammer fish people are a straight ripoff of the Deep Ones. So the Deep Ones were an intelligent, ruthless race of fishy, froggy humanoids worshipping Father Dagon and Mother Hydra. And they were also capable of surviving on the surface long enough to attack humans, but also to mate with them. So, yeah, there's the little gross portion. Uh, and I'm actually pretty sure that our imagination is way worse than any confused fish enduring with that single pathetic lantern at the bottom of the ocean. So onward we go with those filthy aquatic creatures, and number 4 is called the Promethean.
I have a strong sneaking suspicion that someone has a fetish about fish people, but let's move on.
No.
So, Promethean, which when most people hear is a word that tends to call back to ancient creatures, especially Goliaths or starters of civilizations. And in the Warhammer Oceans, there is a number of primordial beasts that have been around for a long time. And due to their presence in the oceans, especially how deep they tend to live, many of them can avoid the corruption of chaos and just the turning of time and have managed to survive despite all of the years. One of the more dangerous ones that lives in the bottomless depths is Promethean, which is a massive 30-foot across crab, though they do get larger or smaller, that have these really long stalks coming out of the center of its body where its eyes are. But what's notable about it compared to most other crabs is that it actually has a very large gaping maw at the center of its body structure, where basically the bottom and top half of it would meet. And its preferred style of dealing with people is it will sneak up on you from below, either coming up beneath your ship to try and knock part of it over, or even better, he likes to wait until people beach. There's actually a story about how people will go on islands seeking treasure, and Promethean will wait. And as soon as the rowboats come out, he immediately surfaces, and because the ship is so close to land, he comes up behind it, and he just uses his claws to literally shovel people into his mouth, which have these little sharp spiked tendrils that will pierce your flesh and drag you in, kind of like insectoid legs.
That's the depiction of Om Nom 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 on Wikipedia.
Oh, yeah. And he, of course, being a crab, does have two gigantic crab claws that are very capable of reaching up and snipping the largest masts in the Warhammer world. Like some of the largest ships are dwarfed by this guy, and he is smarter than you would think of a stupid beast, and that he will almost beeline for the mast of a ship and cut it in half so that the ship can't move anymore, and people get stuck with him tearing them apart. But his crab claws are easily large enough. There's a direct story of him fitting 3 Norsemen in one of his claws and snipping them all in half because they were being a nuisance. The worst thing about Promethean, though, is that he seems to have a form of greater power than one would expect, because Promethean actually had a cult that was in the city of Marienburg for a while. He was worshipped by mutants, but what was strange about him was that all of the mutants in his cult developed specifically sea creature mutations, like fins, scales, lobster claws, and tentacles. And they believed their crab god was sending them orders through their dreams that if they killed enough people, he would come out of the sea and it would usher in a new era. Of course, the cult was found out by the witch hunters and completely and utterly destroyed. And there hasn't been a cult since. But Promethean is still around and still lurking in the depths, waiting for an easy meal to come his way. And the scariest thing about Promethean is there is evidence suggesting there's not just one Promethean, but a species of them that just live at the bottom of the ocean waiting for a ship to pass overhead or waiting for a particularly ambitious or stupid wizard to summon them up from the depths.
Jesus Christ. So, a giant crab with godlike powers was sending instructions what to do to mutants in their dreams.
Seems that way. He's not a chaos creature, though. He is actually a natural creature of the Warhammer world.
Wow. Well, I guess the Chaos Gods just hasn't managed to corrupt him yet, but he's probably on their list, being such a funky creature as he is.
Either that or they know better.
Oh, yeah, because Promethean can call his other Promethean friends, right? Yeah, so he's the giant enemy crab. Like on that, what was that? Was that some... Where that meme even came from? It was from, I think, PlayStation 3 showcasing. I don't know.
Something like that. It is a famous meme. I remember seeing it on League of Legends. Urgot had a
giant enemy crab god. Yeah, Urgot is a meme of his own. So the roots of this definitely oversized sushi stuffing reach back to at least ancient Greece and their mythology. Might probably reach further, but there's this myth, which you probably heard of, the 12 labors of Hercules, right? And the second labor being slaying the Hydra. But have you heard that Hera, still trying to get rid of that superhero bastard, asked a monstrous crab named Karkinos to help the Hydra slay Hercules? You probably didn't hear anything about that, and let me tell you why. Mostly because the role of Karkinos was a little bit pitiful. He beat Hercules on the foot, and sure, gave the Hydra an upper hand, or an upper paw, but then Hercules kicked the shit out of that crab and killed him. And that was the end of Karkinos' story. So Hera, being a horrible hag that she was, she still felt a little bad for Karkinos because, I mean, come on, that was kind of pathetic. She elevated him to be one of the constellations, and boom, that's how you get, I wanted to say that's how you get cancer, but I don't think that's the most fortunate kind of sentence. No, this is how the zodiac sign named Cancer got created. And much, much less known bonus story, I'll have you known, that there's another monstrous crab named, this will be hard, Tambano Cano. His name is Tambano Cano, and he's present in myths of the Mandaya people from Philippines. I don't know, I would say that any critter enlarged to the size of an average American shopping mall is pretty disturbing, even a tadpole. But then again, a huge crab with just shoving everything inside its toothy maw, I don't know. That's too much for me. So, number 3, Charybdis. And
yes, indeed.
That's the bad boy you know from Total War, yes. But it turns out that Creative Assembly pimped Charybdis in a kind of different direction than the original from the lore. Am I right? Tell us about it.
Oh, yeah. Which, before we get into Charybdis, just as kind of a fun bonus fact for anyone wondering, that poor crab may have had his ass kicked by Hercules, but Promethean probably would stand a better chance. A, because his armor is known to be so tough that even he has a tougher hide than dragons do in the Warhammer universe. Because he's just ridiculous.
Yes, let's make it huge with psychic powers, but also unkillable. Because fun.
All right, so Charybdis. So Charybdis is a monster that comes from the Boiling Sea to the west of Nagaroth, which for those of you who don't know, the Boiling Sea is basically a primordial area where long ago there was a massive earthquake, and this is before the elves even existed. There was a great earthquake that caused a lot of the mountain range to collapse into the ocean and create a series of islands, but it also ripped open the earth itself beneath the waves and has just left it open, exposed to all these lava vents, which causes the sea to be constantly boiling. And it's known to be probably the most dangerous region on the seas, because that's where a lot of the most powerful and horrific monsters gather, like the infamous Helldrakes that the Dark Elves try and build black arcs, or attach their black arcs to its back, because it can power them through the seas, and it's a horrifying creature in its own right. And the Charybdis is a native from that region. The thing about the Charybdis, though, is that, first of all, it's a sea monster. So while it's surprisingly adept on land for being a sea monster, it's pretty much the king of battle when it comes to being in the ocean. The Dark Elves many times have tried to capture them while they were close or under the sea, and every time has ended in complete and absolute failure. The only way they can actually defeat them is a sorceress has to use her magic to basically lure it onto land. And even then, it's a difficult prospect to capture one. Now, the good news about the Charybdis is that it's fairly stupid. It's not the most intelligent creature. It doesn't think very hard. All it cares about is eating, eating, and more eating. So long as it's accomplishing that goal, it doesn't really care much else. So it's easy to train for the Dark Elves. But here's the thing about the Charybdis that makes it a little bit more of a horrifying creature, is that it has 6 mouths. Most people know that it has 5, but not everyone knows about the 6th one, which they actually did properly include in Total War, which is in the middle of its chest, or the upper part of its belly, it has another mouth. And the way Charybdis eats is he'll basically stomp forward, and if you're lucky, you'll just be crushed underneath his bulk or impaled by a claw, or his tail will just snap your spine and send you flying as a ragdoll. What he usually prefers to do is, as you can see around each of his heads, he has these weird little tendrils that are actually functioning tentacles. And all of them are covered in a poisonous slime. And what they do is they wrap around your limbs and hold you close to his mouth, which is full of a bunch of curved fangs that will reach forward and pull chunks out of you very, very quickly. They just reach forward, rip off a piece of your flesh, rip forward, and it'll eventually pass you down as you slowly but surely just get torn to pieces. This also makes it very dangerous to other monsters, and is why it has an anti-large bonus, or was traditionally good against monsters, was a trait it has that the Dark Elves came to call the Feast of Bones, which is that it would latch all of its mouths onto a creature and lock onto it with its tentacles, and its main head, the protrusions that come out of it, what makes its main head unique is that it has actual spikes, so it can claw and dig into your flesh. And then what it would do is, while all 5 of the mouths are attached to you, all of those little fangs would push out and just start ripping huge chunks of the monster's flesh out. So it's able to do insane amounts of damage by locking onto monsters and basically just burrow 5 holes all the way to their organs and kill them. Where of course, then it will proceed to go back to feasting normally. The other thing about the Charybdis is there's 2 more notable features it has. One is that the creature is fairly hungry most of the time, because next to trolls, it has the best digestive system known in the Warhammer Fantasy universe. It can literally dissolve almost anything. But the Charybdis does have a peculiar feature in that it does not process or break down gold, jewels, or magical items. So for the Dark Elves, for a Beastmaster, Charybdis is kind of a win-win if it loses or survives or not. Because if it dies, all the Dark Elves do is they'll literally cut open its belly, and there will be an actual treasure trove of everything the Charybdis has ever eaten of value.
Wait, does Charybdis poop? Because if he does, that's like a win-win-win.
I don't think he does in a usual way, because all of that apparently just stays inside of him until he dies.
Okay, that's less practical, but I mean, still good.
Oh yeah, and then of course it's a very strong and tough creature, because where in our world the way physics works is if you go down to the bottom of the ocean and you live there, you have to have a body that's capable of withstanding a lot of pressure. When those creatures come up to the surface, they tend to kind of explode or puff out. A Charybdis seems to kind of do something a little different. When Charybdis comes to the surface, instead of expanding like he should and becoming hideous, instead all of his resilience and toughness for living at those crushing depths just gets augmented. Essentially, he remains just as tough and just as strong as he would being at the bottom of the sea. So you're facing a creature that can literally withstand probably hundreds, if not, I'm not sure how much pressure is, how many pounds of pressure is on you at the bottom of the sea, but he can withstand a shitload of pressure, which is why it's traditionally associated as being an incredibly tough creature. Even though both in tabletop and Total War Warhammer, they kind of had to low-key its defenses a little bit to make it balanced.
Now I'm really wondering what would happen if we shot Charybdis into space. That's for the future video. Just make a simulation. So you said that it pretty much the maws of Charybdis, they look like giant leeches. But instead of talking about leeches, let's look at the creature's name. And if you guys paid attention on history classes, it will take you again to ancient Greece and Homer and his epic poem called the Odyssey. And there, in the Strait of Messina, resided two sea monsters, Scylla and Charybdis. I was actually reading a whole article how to correctly pronounce those two names from a Greek point of view. I hope I did it correct. But regardless, Charybdis, the name is really, really similar. So those two sea monsters were waiting for the sailors to avoid one and end up in the maw of the other, because the Strait of Messina is really narrow. And although the description is scarce, Charybdis was associated with a whirlpool, as she was said to swallow huge amounts of water and then belch them out 3 times a day. If a ship got too close, her jaws would suck it down into the abyss. The whole whirlpool business and the Charybdis victims being pulled in underwater are probably the reason why later this monster began to be depicted as a giant leech-like creature with circular maw that sucked in anything and everything. So, a gargantuan carnivorous leech. They didn't even change her name that much in Warhammer. So I believe this is another straight ripoff, which is kind of cool, really. And staying on that gross, more gross than scary train, here's number 2, the amoebae. I don't really know how to pronounce it, so help.
Okay, and apparently I'm doing this for every creature. As a quick aside, wasn't Scylla like a multi-headed freaky thing in a cave?
I think so, yeah.
I can't help but wonder if Games Workshop like slapped the two of them together.
That's actually something we could research for the next one, really.
But in any event, we've got a big disgusting blob to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So the amoeba. The amoeba are these, like in our world, it's a single-celled organism that kind of looks like a slime or a jelly, but unfortunately for everyone in the Warhammer Fantasy world, instead of being only visible under a microscope thing like that, they tend to be more along the lines of a 7-foot diameter, and they can get notably larger. The largest one ever seen being in the ballpark of about 10 feet. Now, these things are idiots. They have no form of intelligence. They don't think. They're a single-cell organism. But what they do is they hang out in the ocean and in rivers, and many of them are colored, but some are colorless, so they're difficult to see, and they just wait. And they wait and wait and wait until they sense basically a life form close, like the warmth of something living. And then what they'll do is they will wait a certain amount of time for the thing to stop, and they come on land. Now, the scary thing about them is they're actually surprisingly dexterous on land for what you would expect from an amoeba. They're not like the blob in that they can only like inch long, but they can stretch out these pseudopods numbers of yards, and it'll land on the ground and pull the rest of the amoeba towards whatever it's pursuing. And If it reaches you, it'll just absorb you and immediately start digesting you. And the rather terrifying part about it is that if it starts digesting you, there is no way for you to get out. And you can't scream or anything because you're encased in basically a giant digestive fluid. And there's actually an anecdotal story that was written by an author with an amoeba in it. And the thing they mention is that in about 6 hours, so over the course of a late evening, it had eaten a poor fellow called Faisal. And Faisal, by the time his companions woke up and realized he had been eaten, only bits of him were left, and he was described as looking like half-melted cheese on toasted bread.
Not sure if hungry or quite the contrary.
The good thing about amoebas is that they do have a notable weakness in their kind of idiocy, in that amoebas do not like extremes of either temperature. So they're terrified of fire or ice. They don't go to extreme environments. So you're safe if you live somewhere extremely hot or cold. And if you see one, fire will usually get it off your back and allow you to take care of it. But just like you would expect from an amoeba, they are surprisingly dangerous in that they are very relentless and will pursue you unless you have an extreme. Because you can kill it with stabbing it to death, but it takes a little while.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, stabbing at your evening pudding, at your Thanksgiving pudding.
Yeah, and they are very, very nasty creatures. And those pseudopods, there is, in the anecdote I mentioned earlier, it talks about someone being struck by one, and it will literally start dissolving your flesh the instant it makes contact with you, and it will rip through your clothes in like half a second. Armor can hold it off for just a tiny bit, but it can digest anything. It's literally just a giant rolling puddle of digestive juices that is just constantly trying to make itself larger. And it just lurks, waiting for you to go to sleep if you live too close to water. Which, as another fun fact, if you think you're safe by hiding inside, if there is so much as a crack in a door, the ceiling, the floor, it can come through it, even if it's one of the 10-foot ones. It just takes a little bit, but it can completely do it.
I'm in your kitchen eating your leg. So I actually prepared myself with a movie that I think was very inspirational to people who thought of the amoebae, bay, she's the bay. But now that I was listening to Sotek, I recalled something else, namely a little short story from Stephen King, which was published in, I think, the Skeleton Crew short story collection. And that little novella was called The Raft. And it scared the hell out of me when I was like 11 or something, reading The Skeleton Crew for the first time. And basically what happened was a group of friends just, I think, went out on a lake or some other water, body of water. They went on a raft. Supposedly they meant to chill and all. But something started to appear in the water, which, if I remember correctly, looked like an oil spill. And it turned out, after one of them poked at it, that oil spill has a huge taste for anything that you put in it. So obviously someone fell, someone lost a leg, and they couldn't really swim back to the shore because they didn't have anything to paddle with, or they did, but that weird thing in the water dissolved it. So that sounds pretty much like the amoebae. It's just, I don't think it was a creature. I think it was some sort of a substance. King never, unfortunately, explained that. But that movie that I mentioned is obviously The Blob. And in some circles, considered classic, but you don't have to be in those circles. So let me quickly summarize what The Blob is. It's a 1958, I think, old as hell, sci-fi / horror movie with, check this out, Steve McQueen. And that's an odd mix, but the antagonist is basically the amoebae that you just heard about. A gelatinous creature which engulfs, dissolves, and consumes its prey. And I'm pretty sure that the Blob played its very vital part in creating those cute sea inhabitants. And speaking of cute sea inhabitants, we are onto the majestic number one, the behemoth. And when first telling me about this baby, Sotek himself said that it was totally based on Moby Dick. So let's hear how that checks out.
All right, so behemoth. Behemoth is an individual, not a species. Thank God. In that it's not sure if he's the last of his species or merely the largest, but there hasn't been anyone seen like him in a very long time. And Behemoth is ancient. He is beyond ancient. He was around before the elves by a long shot. But in any event, Behemoth is a colossal white whale. He is one of the largest creatures in the oceans of the Warhammer world, which when you have sea dragons and 60-foot long octopus and chaos monsters and all sorts of other horrible things, that's an impressive feat. He is, as I said earlier, known as one of the kings of the sea. He's not the king, but he's one of them. Now, what makes Behemoth a little different from the mythical whale from Moby Dick is that Behemoth, just because Warhammer has to make everything more extreme, has a massive single horn protruding off his head like a narwhal would. In addition, though, all of his teeth are incredibly sharp and are at least 6 feet long. So he is really damn big. And his preferred hunting method is he will wait in the very big depths of the ocean, and if a ship passes over him, you don't get any warning. If you're a sailor looking down at the ocean, you might see a flicker of movement before his horn smashes your ship. He just comes straight up from underneath you, breaks your ship in half, and then he just devours everything.
Narwhals swimming in the ocean.
And that being said, Behemoth is also incredibly tough. People have tried to hunt him for centuries now. He has a bunch of scars and harpoons sticking out of him, but he doesn't notice any of them because his hide is so thick that most conventional weaponry just can't harm him. Which, granted, only a few races are stupid enough to try. The elves are pretty good about just avoiding him at all costs because they view him as a primordial spirit almost. The elves even have a myth and a legend that if someone were to consume a piece of his flesh after killing him, that it would cause the world to end. So the elves try and give him a bit of a distance. That being said, as Anna mentioned a moment ago, this is a direct comparison to Moby Dick. And it wouldn't be Moby Dick if you didn't have the obsessed idiot captain trying to chase him down. And in the Warhammer world, they decided to go full on in that there's an orc hulk ship known as the Peaker that pursues him across the ocean. And it's crewed by a bunch of orcs who have no idea what they're doing most of the time. And they were led by a orc pirate captain known as Captain Agog.
Of course.
And Captain Agog was not
the sharpest tool in the shed.
And his notorious adventure came to an end after pursuing the behemoth all around the 7 seas. Assuming Warhammer only has 7 seas, I think there's actually more than that. But in any event, he pursued them all around the world until they finally found Behemoth. And his last words were, with a mad grin on his face, he told his first in command, "Get me a whale sticker, a rope, and me best swimming pants." And then he jumped into the ocean and was never seen again.
Actually, let's hear a little passage from Sotek to make you guys fully realize what a gnarly creature that was.
Okay, I just really wanted to read this in appreciation of, I'm not sure who did it, but whatever author wrote it. So this is an account from Puss Fudget, who was an orc mate on Captain Agog's ship, and this is what he had to say about the whole situation. Puss Fudget, yep. So this is his exact quote. He says, "Captain Agog were a mad zogger. He got us a hulk ship we called the Peaker and put together a crew just by promising gold and busting heads. We thought we was going to get to be pirates with the peg legs and eye patches and all the Paris we could eat, but we was wrong. Agog had bigger fish to fry, the biggest fish of them all, Behemoth, the great white whale. He was mad for it, he were. Never did find out why. He dragged us halfway across the world looking for that whale. We was sick and hungry, and we ate almost all of the gobos when we finally saw it off the starboard over there.
All the gobos.
Had a ginormous, dirty horn sticking out of its board and teeth like nothing you ever seen. I nearly squint myself just to look at it. I love that.
Yeah, this is how the boys get in the troubles. So, yeah, exactly. Sounds indeed like that troll whale that Captain Ahab was obsessed with, because in the original book by Melville, the name was Captain Ahab. So at least he was human and a little more dignified than the orc charging in his best swim pants. But I would still pick the orc. The comedy element is just top notch in that. But Moby Dick didn't have a horn. In my opinion, the horn makes it double troll. It's like the narwhal song, but on acid. Anyway, even without the horn, Moby Dick was said to snap boats in half with its enormous jaws, which I don't know. Whales don't really have teeth, so I guess it's just a matter of pressure. But Moby Dick also happened to be as specific as biting off Captain Ahab's leg. And that was mostly the reason why Captain Ahab was really pissed and also chased Moby Dick across the seven seas, just like Agag. But when it comes to real life, you guys probably know whales are generally not that vicious, since they are not carnivorous. They're just too big and too stupid to chase and prey. But there were rare events of ships and whalers being mauled by their intended prey. And Melville even based his Moby Dick on such a creature, which was named Mocha Dick. What is that dick obsession? Is that some Freudian thing? But Mocha Dick was a gigantic whale said to literally hunt sailors. And I don't know, Melville could at least change the name a little bit, but Mocha Dick, Moby Dick, whatever. So sure, we've got the nasty Moby Dick, but that just asks for a whole conversation about other colossal sea monsters that supposedly hunted ships and gave the sailors of the past some ancient version of PTSD. And the first thing that comes to mind is obviously the Kraken, and you might think of the Leviathan too, or even the Jormungand, the Midgard serpent from Norse mythology. And I hope you also thought of good old Cthulhu. But anyway, keep those beasts in mind, because Sotek and I will be back with more Warhammer Sea Terror sometime in the future. And obviously, we will be back with all other kinds of terrors dwelling in all environments. So thank you ever so much for watching and listening, guys.
Yeah, and if you have a particular theme you'd like to see, we're all ears. It makes cutting down the list a lot easier.
Oh yeah, because our preparations for those videos are generally indulging ourselves in monster legends. Sotek provides the Warhammer beasts, and I'm like, oh yeah, so there's this urban legend about blah blah, and this is how we spend the day. And then we're like, weren't we supposed to make a video though? So truly, guys, if you have something you want to see, if you're curious about particular beasts and their origins, we are all ears, like Sotek said. And again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you around, guys.
Oh, bye.